Good evening and welcome to another edition of Money Talk with Melanie. I'm your business diva, Melanie Collette, broadcasting live via SHR Media and streaming live on Facebook from beautiful Cape May County, New Jersey. My guest today is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. He is going to talk to us today about he's the CEO. First of all, he's the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, and he's going to talk to us today about the book "Never Go with Your Gut: How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disaster." So I'm really excited to talk to him about that, especially since I think that we've all been taught all of our lives that we need to go with our gut, and that going with your gut is absolutely the best thing to do, et cetera, et cetera. But Dr. Tsipursky tells us different. So I'm excited to see what he has to say about that. He is actually returning to the show. He was on the show, one of the early guests on the show when it was in its infancy. So I'm really excited to have him on the show today. But before we do that, a little bit of housekeeping. If you are not following me on Twitter, if you're not following the show on Twitter, if you want archived shows, I put inspirational quotes and different financial articles on my Twitter account and on my Facebook page. You can follow me on Facebook at Money Talk with Melanie. You can follow me on Twitter at Money Talk Mel. If you dare to follow my political musings, you can do so at njgopdiva.com. That's njgopdiva.com. You can also get archived episodes of Money Talk with Melanie at moneytalkwithmelanie.com. If you'd rather watch the video, that's the audio. If you'd rather watch the video, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is up and running now at YouTube, /Money Talk with Melanie. I think I covered everything. Now for the Money Talk news. U.S. jobs report today was absolutely ridiculous. Jobs growth soared in November to 266,000 new jobs. So that's wonderful. And that's better than the expected 187,000 that was expected by economists that were polled by Dow Jones. The unemployment rate went down from 3.5 to 3.6%. That's back to the 2019 low, which matches the lowest jobless rate since 1969. That is wonderful. I would be remiss if I went without saying that the GM strike ending had a lot to do with that, and that resulted in an overall gain of 54,000 jobs in manufacturing. And then finally, hooray, average hourly earnings rose 3.1% from a year ago. And this is above the 3% that was expected by that same poll at Dow Jones. So that's all like really good financial news that just came in today. At least I think it sounds good for our economy. And that is in the midst of us going through, well, I say us because it's no secret that I support President Donald Trump. That's in the midst of going through impeachment hearings. It looks like they are going to, that the Democratic caucus is going to impeach him. I doubt he will be removed from office. I don't know how many people are aware that it does need to be approved by the Senate. A lot of people aren't aware. The average Joe are just not aware about how their government works. So I also always feel the need to mention the mechanics of it. So just because he gets impeached, that is not the end of the matter. The end of the matter is it getting through Congress, and they would have to flip several seats on the Republican side. And thus far, it has not been a bipartisan operation at all. So it's highly unlikely, at least that's what the experts say, and that's what I also believe, highly unlikely that the president will actually be removed from office, although it looks at this point likely that he will be impeached, unfortunately, because it's just so, at least, in my opinion, I watched a lot of the hearings. They don't really have much to go on. It's a lot of conjecture and innuendo and what I heard whisper down the lane kind of situation. So, but it looks like they're going to do it anyway. Got to be really concerned about the future of the country when they're doing things the way that they are doing it. Now, in other financial news, Uber, which is one of the, if not the world's largest ride-sharing company in the world, revealed their assaults report. I believe it was late last night or yesterday, and it's a safety report. They said that they had over 3,000 sexual assaults reported just in the U.S. in 2018. That is absolutely alarming. Especially for someone like me who uses Uber rather often when I'm in New York City or when I'm in DC. That is really scary. And so Uber's going to have to, they're going to really have to do something about it. I found it interesting, and I guess maybe because the data is not out, but I found it interesting that of all the reports I've read, nobody mentioned the other ride sharing apps, or at least mentioned Lyft, which is kind of like the second most popular ride sharing app that there is. I would be curious to know what their numbers are as well. I find it, as I was in the Uber just last weekend, as a matter of fact, I was trying to figure out how that could happen, but I guess it would depend on your area. And like, I'm trying to figure out how somebody could lock me in a car, and there could be, and I'm not like blaming the victim, but of course I was thinking about that as I was in the back of an Uber on in New York City. But New York City is a completely different animal. There's people everywhere. You're hard pressed to find some dark corner or alley or something like that where something like that could possibly happen. But that's a very scary thing that they need to do something about, for sure. Another report is about Dollar General. Dollar General is catching on like gangbusters. I mean, there's even memes about how there are dollar stores just popping up everywhere, and a lot of brick and mortar retail stores are shutting down, but Dollar General is actually opening up 1,000 new shops within the next year, which is kind of crazy. So that's just something interesting about Dollar General. Now, this did not surprise me at all, me being an educator myself and having been in education for 20 some odd years. According to an editor at LinkedIn, there's a decline in teaching careers. Fewer people are becoming teachers, with enrollment in required teaching training programs dropping by 1/3 since 2010. And that's according to a report from the Center for American Progress. I will tell you, I can tell you many of the problems in the teaching profession and why people are probably just not picking teachers as a profession. It's a much harder job than people might imagine. There's many behavioral problems, the way the school, in my opinion, this is going to sound terrible. We just don't, in the public school system, set students up for success. And it depends on how you measure success. I personally measure success by whether or not my kids are learning anything. But I find that the measurement for success seems to be a little bit different in most public schools. And I've taught in about 4 at this point. And I've also been in private schools. I was in a private school for 14 years. So I kind of have something to compare it to. But it can be a very difficult job where teachers have probably the least amount of power in, I would say, the entire system. A lot of people blame teachers for a lot of things, but I blame the politicians. I think as they say, you know what rolls downhill, and and that a lot of it has to do with the politicians. You know, the teachers are run by the administrators. The administrators are run by the politicians, really, and their expectations. So I just think it's scary, but less and less people are going into teaching. The pay is not all that wonderful, and it's a very challenging job. It is not like Little House on the Prairie. Just saying. You're listening to Money Talk with Melanie. I'm your business diva, Melanie Collette. My guest today is Dr. Tsipursky. He's going to talk to us today about how to never go with your gut, how pioneering leaders make the best decisions and avoid business disasters. We'll be back in a few minutes. Brand new Ron Edwards notebook coming your way right now.
Nancy Pelosi has announced that Democrats will proceed with articles of impeachment against President Trump, declaring, quote, "The president's conduct leaves us no choice but to act," unquote. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards on today's page from the Edwards Notebook. So now that the second of the Democrats' three-ring circus has been finally brought into focus, political clowns and their Leviathan media supporting cast are in full throttle, destroy President Trump mode for all the world to see. The first time in American history, the decision to impeach the president, officially presented to be in response to Trump's bad behavior, is being conducted by and only one political party. The truth is, Pelosi and her fellow leftist Democrats hate Trump for daring to put American interest above the leftist mission to fundamentally transform America and permanently eradicate constitutional underpinnings and our unalienable rights. The hate-filled Democrats will ultimately fail in their effort to take down President Trump, but they will experience an implosion of their efforts and the re-election of President Trump. Case closed. I'm Ron Edwards.
Ron Edwards, the new voice of America.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
Making a living can be tough these days with so many jobs going overseas. If you love numbers and puzzles and want job security, you can become a tax specialist with an amazing 6-month tax course from Tax Mama. Operate your own tax practice locally or anywhere in the world where there are American taxpayers. It's a great way to write off your trips to visit family for months at a time. Everything you need to pass the IRS 3 special enrollment examinations is included in this course. Visit irsexams.school. And if you need more than 6 months, that's okay. Take your time. You're in the course until you pass the exams or until you unsubscribe and reject Tax Mama's emails.
And we're back. You're listening to Money Talk with Melanie. I'm your business diva, Melanie Collette. And this hour, our guest is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. He's the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts. He's talking to us today about his new book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Disasters. A little bit about Dr. Tsipursky. He's a professor at Ohio State University, president at International Insights, author of multiple books, including the one we are going to talk about today. He is fighting post-truth politics with behavioral science, which is one of the things we talked about the last time he was here. He's returning to Money Talk with Melanie. He is the lead creator of the Pro-Truth Pledge, a frequent writer for prominent publications such as Time Magazine, Scientific American, Psychology Today, Salon, and the Huffington Post, and a frequent guest on TV, radio stations, and podcasts and video casts like Money Talk with Melanie. And without further ado, Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, how are you?
Hey, Melanie, it's such a pleasure to be back on. Thanks so much for having me.
The pleasure is mine. I'm so glad that you're coming back with a brand new book. I found the title to be really intriguing because I've always been told that I should go with my gut to make my best decisions. And it sounds to me like from the title that you're saying that is not the case.
It's not the case indeed, and it's very unfortunate that misleading advice is so widespread. Our gut reactions, what the recent research is showing us, it's business advice is actually often not based on evidence. It's kind of the same thing that a lot of medicine used to be when people sold snake oil in the olden times. And only recently have we really developed very clear standards for evidence in medicine, recently from a historical perspective. Now, of course, only recently are we doing actual evidence-based research on business decision-making, and this is what I'm talking about. My book is actually the first one to popularize the research on the dangerous judgment errors that we all make as human beings because of how our brains are wired. And our gut reactions are actually not adapted for the modern business environment. You might be surprised, right? The evolutionary process has not yet adapted our emotions, our feelings, our instincts to be where they should be in the modern business environment. Unfortunately, our gut reactions are actually adapted for the savanna environment, when we used to be hunters and foragers, and we used to live in small tribes of 15 to 150 people, and we had to have the strong fight or flight response. We had to decide and jump very quickly, make decisions very quickly in order to survive. Right now, we don't need to do that, but we still tend to make decisions way too quickly, and we don't make the right decisions because of that. That's one. And we don't make the right decisions because we tend to want to be with people who are like us, work with people who are like us, who share our background, our appearance, our thought patterns, and that's really harmful for successful business relationships.
Oh, wow. Okay, now that's a deep thought that we like to work with people who think like us, because I work in an environment where most people do not think like me. At all. I'm a teacher. I'm a conservative Republican, and many of them tend to be Democrats or liberals. And I do find it to be a struggle. So it's just interesting that you say that, because most of the time I'm working by myself, so I don't necessarily have to work with others, but it's still a struggle to be in that environment where you know that the think kind of goes one way and you're going in the opposite direction.
Oh, I bet it's a big struggle, and I bet you don't reveal that at interviews, because I have a high probability estimate if you reveal that at an interview that you won't be hired, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Even though your political leanings have nothing to do with your ability to perform your job, that's still something that would cause you to not be hired.
Yep.
And this is it's a perfect illustration and case study of how we make really bad decisions in our business relationships. Same thing goes. I'll give you an example. I'm here at Ohio State, so I was used to be a professor at Ohio State. I live in Columbus, which is the home of the Buckeyes, and our big football rivals, is the University of Michigan Wolverines. They're the big enemy of Ohio State. So I was giving a presentation, keynote speech, to over 100 HR leaders in diversity and inclusion, specifically diversity and inclusion conference. And I asked them, how many of you would hire a University of Michigan fan? You know how many of them said they would? How many raised their hands? 3 people out of 100 in the Columbus, Ohio area would hire a University of Michigan fan. So that's another, being a University of Michigan fan has nothing to do with their ability to perform the job, but it would preclude them from being hired by the large majority of HR professionals in the Central Ohio area.
Absolutely. And I never, when I'm interviewing for a job in education, never, ever, ever reveal that about myself. Never. Now, where I am now, I'm tenured, so it doesn't matter.
Oh, good. I'm glad that you could talk about it. Well, there you go. But of course, that leads to a clear example of what's a big problem in our business decision-making organizations, decision-making nonprofits. Schools are nonprofits. So nonprofit decision-making, government decision-making, that we tend to hire people who are like us. But of course, isn't it great for students to get different perspectives? If they only got the perspectives of Democrats, liberals, that would be harmful for them going forward. They would not be educated to have a fully diverse perspective. So really, schools should be deliberately looking for people who have different modes of thought, whether it's Republicans in this case, or in other cases, maybe they should be looking for people who have an immigrant background, who are not Americans, so they get a diversity of cultural perspectives. Or maybe people who are in the North should hire a Southerner to be a school teacher, so they get that geographical difference. That's really important, and we don't think about these things. And then students are harmed, of course. So this is one example of where students are harmed, and we can talk about how that really harms business leaders, because it really does if you don't have a diversity of thought within the company.
Indeed, and you know what? You're bringing up another point, and as a professor, I'm sure you're aware of this. One of the things that they tell you in teaching is that you should diversify the way you teach, right? That because students learn differently. Some students learn audibly, some learn visually, some are kinesthetic learners. And so you should, as an educator, one of the things that you should do is kind of switch up the way you should teach. Some kids benefit from collaborative teaching, things like that, collaborative learning, I should say, and things like that. But ironically, or to your point, teachers tend to only teach the way they learn. So consequently, I tend to teach visually. And I steer toward teaching visually. I detest kinesthetic learning. I don't want my kids moving around, and I don't like collaborative learning. Consequently, it's a real effort for me to come up with projects and things to teach that way every once in a while, because it's completely uncomfortable, but my kids totally benefit from that.
Yeah, so you understand that and you try to make the effort. And there are so many people who don't make the effort even though they should. So let's take an example, actually, going to the business world. Something that you were talking about at the beginning of the program is Uber and sexual harassment. That actually has a lot to do. You might be surprised to find that continuity, but it has a lot to do with people who are like us and people who are not like us. So the leadership at Uber, famously Travis Kovalanek, the former CEO of Uber, was fired, and so many other people at Uber were fired around 2017 when the Me Too movement became stronger than it used to be, and when sexual harassment actually began to matter. And previously, males like Travis Kalanick and other people like him who had that strong patriarchal sense that, sexual harassment doesn't really matter, not a big deal. They had the sense of tribalism around other males who were like them. They didn't consider women to really be part of their tribe, to be equal, to be significant and important. And of course, this is, looking at it now, you and I can say that's terrible, and I would have said it's terrible back then, but he just didn't have that perspective. And many people at Uber, the leadership, don't have that perspective. They still have that patriarchal sense, and they still don't consider women to be really part of their tribe and peer members. They don't hire women. They don't include their perspective nearly enough in the leadership team, which is why the culture at Uber still permits and facilitates sexual harassment.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I found that number astounding. 3,000 in 1 year. Wow. But you're absolutely right about where that's concerned. And I it's stunning to me to think that that is where that comes from. If you know what I'm saying, that type of thinking is where that comes from. Now, you say that you should never go with your gut. Now, I'm going to propose something to you, and you tell me whether you think this is right. You did kind of introduce why you feel that way. Now, I read in an article, because I've always thought that instincts were good, but I never knew why. And I read an article once that your brain absorbs all this information, whether you're conscious of it or not, and that your gut instinct is basically what happens when your mind has to process information that you don't know you have quickly. And that's where your gut instinct that you should make this decision comes from. Now, I'm sure it was based on some study, and you know how that goes. As far as how relevant that explanation is, but I thought it was a good one. But you're saying that as far as business is concerned, that's not a method that we want to use.
Yes, in business, so what you're talking about is exactly what is happening with the gut instinct. That's what it's adapted for. The gut instinct is adapted for fast, immediate, very quick decision making. So if you want to get out of the way of a moving bus, you should not take the time to think through whether you want to get out of the way of the moving bus. If you have a baseball flying at your head, you don't want to take the time to think about whether you should duck or not. Those are good times to go with your instincts. But there is almost never a situation in business like that, or in organizational decision making, like what kind of a teacher you should hire, or what kind of a project you should develop for your students. That's completely separate from business decision making. Our gut reactions are perfectly adapted for fight or flight response. That's what they're adapted for. They're adapted for tribalism. We already talked about that a little bit. And we can talk about other aspects of tribalism that really harm businesses, like the desire to climb to the top of the tribal hierarchy, which causes a lot of damage. We can talk about that. But here is the fight or flight response is the other aspect that causes us these dangerous judgment errors that cognitive neuroscientists and behavioral economists like myself call cognitive biases, because we are tempted to make decisions with which we're comfortable with our gut reactions. Our gut reactions tell us, hey, do this. And we feel good about doing this, whether doing good is hiring people who are like us or ignoring sexual harassment, discrimination, because we don't think it's a big deal, which is terrible, but that's how people like that at Uber apparently thought and maybe still likely think. So this is the quick decision-making that a lot of business leaders are praised for. You notice that business leaders are praised for making quick decisions. And that's very harmful for our leaders, for business leaders, the fact that they're praised for making quick decisions. I mean, look at the atrocious failure rate of small businesses. About half of all small businesses fail within the first 5 years. 2/3 of them fail within the first decade. That's horrible. That's unbelievable when we look at these numbers, and that happens because of gut reaction. And the same thing happens in big businesses. I mean, we talked about Uber making some really terrible decisions, but let's look at studies. There was a study that looked at large companies that were worth over $500 million in revenue that went bankrupt in the United States from 1981 to 2007, so before the financial crisis. It found 423 companies, and it looked at the causes for bankruptcy. 46% of the causes for bankruptcy, 46%, can be purely attributed to bad strategic decision-making by the leadership. And this is described in $1 Billion Lessons by Chinkamui. So 46% bad strategic decisions where leaders just went with their intuition, they felt something was right, and they went with it, and they made some really bad decisions. A great example is Kodak. Kodak invented the digital camera. I don't know if you know that, in 1984. But it put it on the shelf, and it decided to invest in film because film cameras were more profitable. And then Kodak kept going, investing in film, even though digital camera production was way overtaking film. It's clear that it was the future. But Kodak chose not to invest in it. It chose to invest in film, and by the early 2000s, Kodak went bankrupt. So this is an example of bad strategic decision-making. Large company leads to bankruptcy.
I did not realize that that's what happened to Kodak.
Yep, that's exactly what happened to Kodak. So no Kodak moments anymore. Sorry about that.
and that actually, in full disclosure, I used to do marketing for Kodak years ago in my other life. I used to do marketing for them, and they did really focus on film. So what you're saying is absolutely right. And at the time, quite frankly, I wondered why they weren't doing more digital things in light of what was going on with technology. I wonder why we were so focused on that. That is interesting, but I didn't know that that's why they eventually went belly up, but it makes absolute sense. Now, are there times in business decisions when it's okay to go with your gut? I mean, people say that being decisive is a good thing, right?
Unfortunately, being decisive is a bad thing. It's actually a very bad thing to be decisive in the sense that you make decisions quickly. Now, what you want to do is, once you make a decision, you want to be confident and implement it effectively. But before you actually make a decision, you want to be very humble about your ability to make decisions. You want to get a variety of perspectives and consider every perspective. Don't just go with your intuition. Don't go with your gut. So this is a problem. And this is not something we should not go with our guts in business decisions overwhelmingly. Now, there are a couple of cases where in business settings, it's okay to go with your gut. These are exceptions. When you know somebody for a long time, and this goes back to the tribal environment, the bigger principle here is if it's something like the tribal environment, which there aren't that many cases in the modern world that it's tribal, then you should go with your gut. Then it's okay to go with your gut. So tribal environment means, let's say you know somebody for a long time. You have a business relationship. You kind of know that person. You know what they're like somebody from your tribe, like you would know somebody from your tribe. And suddenly something that the person is telling you is feeling off. It feels weird. It feels like maybe that person is not being genuine in some way. That time is when you should listen to your gut and say, if I don't have additional information, I'm probably not going to do the deal that you're proposing, because it's kind of similar to the tribal situation. But if this is a new business partnership and you're thinking a new business partner is telling you something that's wrong, you are probably mistaken. You are very likely to be mistaken, actually, because if that person at least is different from you in some ways, color, race, appearance, thought patterns, and so on, there is extensive research showing that we are terrible at telling apart who is telling the truth and who is lying if we don't know that person. So when pretty much the percentage of people who accurately evaluate whether someone is telling the truth or not, according to studies, is something like 53-54%. And that's considering that a coin flip is 50%.
Right, it sure is. So our biases have impact on what we think is our gut instinct.
Yes, exactly. So the biases, the cognitive biases, what we talked about with tribalism is one clear example. The horns effect is one example where if somebody is different from us in some significant way, so for example, you can probably hear that I have an accent, right?
Right.
Right. Well, there's extensive research research showing that if you hear somebody who doesn't have a mainstream American accent, you're much less likely to trust this person. And if you have, in phone interviews of people who have an American accent, not American accent, overwhelmingly with the same information and same background, people with an American accent tend to get hired, even though the people with a non-American accent might be a better fit for the job, just because of this horns effect, so lack of liking. And this applies to all sorts of backgrounds. We already gave examples of political backgrounds and sports backgrounds causing bad decision-making in business leadership. Same thing and the opposite for halo effect. Halo effect is a cognitive bias where if you like one aspect of somebody, you're much more likely to hire them than you should. So for example, if somebody went to the same college that you did, and you have that shared background, and you like having gone to that college, you are going to be much more likely to hire this person, even though there's absolutely no reason why this person would perform the job better. Now, another interesting thing is if somebody is a male who is a tall male, somebody who is tall, you are going to be much more likely to hire this person. Why is that? Because height is associated with social status in the tribal hierarchy. And we like people with higher social status, unfortunately, and therefore tall people are likelier to get hired. And so on. The same thing goes for fat people. People who are overweight in our current mainstream American culture sense of what does it mean to be overweight are much less likely to be hired, even though they might perform the job just as well or better than people who are not overweight. So these are examples of where we make bad decisions just because of how our brain is wired, this horns effect and the halo effect.
Wow. We're up against a break, but before we have about 3 minutes. So I just wanted to kind of give you the 3-minute warning that we're up against a break. But I found that interesting. Doug in the Facey chat says, hey, vertically challenged here. And I'm vertically challenged too. I'm only 5'2". I hear that. I totally hear what he's saying. I really want you to talk about why it is that business gurus say that going with your gut is such a great approach. Why in the world do they sell this idea and they spread this rumor that it's such a wonderful thing to do? And what you're saying makes perfect sense and is totally logical.
Well, why business gurus tell you that is that they get paid money to tell you that. Basically, people like to do what's comfortable. If somebody tells you, imagine a professional trainer telling you, you don't need to do any training, you don't need to do any workouts, just eat this box of dozen donuts. Wouldn't you feel wonderful? You'd be like, yay, I'm set. I don't need to do anything. And unfortunately, that's what's happening with business gurus who tell you to go with your gut. That's a dozen donuts advice of health training. Now, knowing from the research, we have extensive research showing that eating a dozen donuts is not going to be healthy for you. So you might not choose not to go with the advice of your trainer if the trainer is telling you to do something that's very comfortable and pleasant for you, but the research is showing you that that's a bad idea. Unfortunately, we don't have popular advice that's really widespread. I'm on the forefront of spreading this information about how we should not go with our gut and how we have a lot of decision-making errors that are accompanied with doing the comfortable thing, like going with a donut, and going with our gut in business decisions. And hiring people who are like us, it feels very comfortable, but it's the wrong thing to do for us. And it would be great if we get eventually to that stage where business gurus who tell you to go with their gut, you would recognize that that's terrible advice, just like it's terrible advice from your health trainer to give you a dozen donuts and have you eat them as the health training activity.
So what I hear you saying is that a book sells better if you say, hey, it's super easy, just go with your gut, better than the book that says, actually, good business decision making is really hard, and you may have to do some actual research and some hard work to make good business decisions. That book's probably not going to sell as well and not give you the warm fuzzies.
Exactly. Just like that advice, that, hey, maybe you should put on your sweats and go to the gym. It's not going to sell as well as sit in front of the couch and watch television.
I hear you. I totally hear you. We're up against the break right now. You're listening to Money Talk with Melanie. I'm your business diva, Melanie Collette. We are talking to Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. He's talking to us about why it's important to not go with your gut in business. More specifically, we're talking about his book, Never Go With Your Gut, how pioneering leaders make the best decisions and avoid business disasters. Very exciting to talk to him this afternoon. He's given us some very good information. We'll be back in a few moments.
Right now, you can get the credit you deserve. Just visit MrCreditRepair.biz. Let their expert credit repair specialist remove late payments, charge-offs, collections, even old bankruptcies fast and easy. That's MrCreditRepair.biz. Why go anyplace else? Increase your credit score today. At Mr. Credit, you always get a quality service, all at our everyday discounted price. Stop getting turned down for cars, credit cards, or even new homes. Visit MrCreditRepair.biz today. That's MrCreditRepair.biz. Your credit repair is our #1 priority.
Conservative media. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Hey, this is Michael Wright.
And I'm Shannon Wright.
Join us for The Right Way with Shannon and Mike, Monday through Thursday from 7 to 9 a.m. right here on SHR Media.
Why are they joining us?
For fun things like sports, politics,
Oh, maybe some news and entertainment?
and all kinds of other things.
Money and recipes and events? All kinds of stuff.
Yeah, so join us Monday through Thursday, 7 to 9 a.m. here on SHRmedia.com.
From a public locker inside a dilapidated Long Island rail station comes a show designed to piss off liberals using truth, facts, and ridicule. The Lid Radio Show, featuring the conservative voice from the People's Republic of New York, the Lid himself, Jeff Dunitz. Tune in every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific on the SHR Media Network. Go to shrmedia.com. At Lid Radio, we fight for the truth, justice, and a good kosher T-bone. If you don't listen, Hillary Clinton might sneak into your bedroom in her housecoat late at night and blame you for her election loss. It's the Lid Radio Show with Jeff Dunitz. Hey girls, Carry Girl Gear is here. More and more women every day are concealed carrying, participating in competitive shooting, and getting firearms training. It's not a boys' club anymore, and we don't have to shop in their stores anymore either. Finally, a cool and unique clothing line just for women. Dope tees and hats for the patriotic, concealed carry, and 2A girl. So what are you waiting for? Go check out carrygirlgear.com today.
It's your business diva here, Melanie Collette. I am inviting you to a front row seat as I discuss some of the most intriguing details of wealth and finance with today's movers and shakers in the world of business. Listen in and discover financial truths on a global, domestic, and household scale. Uncover topics that will impact your wallet today and in the future. Money Talk with Melanie airs Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. East, 2 p.m. West, right here on SHR Media and High Plains Pundit Talk Radio. You can't afford to miss it.
New show on the SHR Media Network, Sackheads Against Tyranny. On shrmedia.com. Go there quick like a bunny, 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific every Wednesday. Live and direct on the SHR Media Network. shrmedia.com. Be there.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money Talk with Melanie. I'm your business diva, Melanie Collette, and my guest this hour is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. He is talking to us about his book, Never Go With Your Gut, how pioneering leaders make the best decisions and avoid business disasters. And so he's telling us all about this afternoon, dropping some serious knowledge on us. And, I found something really interesting about your book as far as SWOT analysis and other forms of analysis that we learn about in business school, and they make us do samples of and models of to make sure that we make good business decisions. For those of you who did not have the pleasure of taking these kinds of classes. A SWOT analysis is SWOT. It's an acronym that means strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it's one of the ways by which they tell you in business school that you can, it's a tool that you can use with analysis to try to make good business decisions and to try to evaluate programs and things like that. And you say, Dr. Tsipursky, that those are actually false comforts. Why do you say that?
Unfortunately, a lot of the tools like the SWOT analysis that we use are misleading if you don't apply them to the cognitive bias principle. If you don't think about your cognitive biases and use them as part of the analysis. So SWOT is a perfect example. It's where business leaders by themselves, more likely as part of the group, look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of their business. I've worked with a lot of people who came to me and they showed me their SWOT analysis. And here's what I find. They inevitably list way too many strengths, way too many opportunities, not nearly enough weaknesses, not nearly enough threats. Why? Because business leaders tend to suffer from two big cognitive biases, optimism and overconfidence. Now, the optimism biases, like it sounds, we tend to be very optimistic. Business leaders who, especially entrepreneurs, business leaders at the highest positions, CEOs, those sorts of figures, they tend to be very optimistic about the future, and they need to be optimistic in order to get to their position. Like I said, a lot of enterprises, a lot of startups fail, so people need to be excessively optimistic in order to start one. CEOs need to be excessively optimistic about the future of their company in order to motivate others. So they need to express this optimism. So that's one. Overconfidence bias is related, not quite the same thing. It means that people tend to make decisions way too quickly, whether it's in the positive direction, negative direction. They tend to be way too overconfident about the quality of their judgment. There's extensive research showing that if people say they're 100% confident about something, they're actually 80% likely to be the case. So if somebody says, I'll bet my career, I'll bet the company on this, they're going to lose it 1/5 of the time, 20% of the time. And if you make that bet once a year, you're likely to lose the whole company or the whole career. So that's a set of problems, the optimism bias. Now, overconfidence bias, which causes them to really underestimate threats and risks. So when they underestimate threats and risks, they don't account for the kind of problems that they'll need to deal with. And when a problem comes in, if they already invested all of their resources toward their strategic plan, toward their strengths and opportunities, they just can't deal with a problem. Or they have to pull back a lot of resources, much more than they would have. If you're invested a lot of resources into a project and then you have to take out a lot of resources to deal with another threat, to deal with a big problem, that's going to cause you a lot of damage because you will have wasted resources for that first project. So people go into a lot of problems. They don't account for contingencies. They don't account for risks. This is the biggest problem with SWOT, that people get a sense of false comfort, leaders, entrepreneurs get a sense of false comfort, and therefore make really bad decisions about their strategy going forward.
I can completely see that. And I'm also thinking of another popular tool that's used, cost-benefit analysis. And I would imagine that if it's something that you really want, right, that you're probably overestimating the benefits. And if it's something that you're really not comfortable with, you're probably you probably have a cognitive bias toward the costs of something.
Yes. Yep, that's exactly right. So, and it's called the confirmation bias. So here, that's one of the cognitive biases that has to do with information, how we perceive information. We tend to ignore information that doesn't fit our beliefs, whether it's in business, whether it's in personal. I mean, look at how many people, about half of all marriages in the U.S. end in divorce, maybe a little bit less by now. Now, how could that be? People commit to their lives when people who start a marriage together don't think that it will end in divorce. But they tend to ignore information about their relationship starting to fall apart. They ignore information about tensions, and they don't deal with them in time. If they had dealt with them in time, if they went to marriage counseling, if they talked to their partner, had a lifelong conversation, they would have addressed a lot of the issues that eventually lead to a divorce. But people often don't do that. So the confirmation bias causes us to ignore information. The same thing happens in businesses. With Kodak as a perfect example, with Uber as a perfect example. I mean, look at WeWork. WeWork was a company that was valued at $75 billion at the beginning of 2019. billion. That's not million, it's $1 billion. Now, at the end of 2019, it's valued at about $7 billion. $7 billion, that's a crazy, crazy loss of money. It's an order of magnitude loss. 68 billion. That happened because its leadership chose to go forward and chose to try to have an initial public offering, even though a lot of people told the leadership, hey, it's a bad idea, you should not do the public offering. They ignored the information, they ignored the expensive information showing that a public offering is not going to be a good idea. And as a result, when external investigators looked at the leadership structure, they saw that the governance structure was really bad. They lost confidence in the leadership. They saw there was a number of corrupt activities going on. They lost confidence in the leadership, and a lot of the value of the company was because of the confidence in the leadership and the strategy of the company. And so that eventually went to, the company lost so much money because of the confirmation bias.
That's that's crazy, but it makes sense. But now, what of the Steve Jobs, the Jeff Bezos of the world, the people who, usually because they're so successful, one of the things that history attributes to their success is that they have great business instinct. And it's almost, whenever they're written about, it's almost like they possess something magical, a je ne sais quoi, if you will, that nobody else possesses. So are you saying that's actually not the case?
It's actually not the case. So nobody is magical. Nobody has a specific business instinct. It's in the benefit of people like Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, Jack Welch, Bill Gates, to position themselves as having a magical instinct, because that protects them in the public sphere. That gives them more credibility. That gives them more business opportunities. That they can say, hey, I have a magical wand that causes good decisions to come about. Now, Bill Gates and a lot of other folks were positioned well. They happened to be in the right place in the right time, and they happened to have good skills. But right now, consider Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg was, until a couple of years ago, a heroic figure to the Democrats. He was considered to be a potential Democratic president candidate in, for the 2020 election. So a lot of people were thinking, hey, maybe he'll be the next Democratic presidential candidate. But then the Cambridge Analytica scandal was discovered, and all the trolls were discovered that happened on his watch. The undermining of where Russia and so on actually went in and undermined the American political election, and a lot of Democrats turned against him. And of course, a lot of Republicans did as well for similar reasons. They didn't want American politics to be undermined by Russia. So he went from hero to zero as a result of him allowing this thing to happen on his watch. Same thing happens to a lot of other people. Think about Jack Welch. So Jack Welch is a famous figure. He had a GE from 81 to 2001, so its share price grew 4,000%. But the handpicked successor that he chose, Jeffrey Immelt, made a series of bad decisions. Stock price dropped over 30%, and he was pushed to retire relatively recently, about a year and a half ago, summer of 2018. So we see that the most critical decision that a leader can make, which is about who will take over after them, Jack Welch made a really bad decision, and he acknowledged that. He acknowledged that he kind of screwed up the decision-making process there. So a lot of leaders who we now think of as heroes might, in the end, turn out to be zeros.
Now, that is very true. Now, the cognitive biases that we have, how can we tell which ones we're vulnerable to? Because I would imagine that differs from person to person.
It does. So I'll give you an example, just to kind of self-revealing. I tend to be very optimistic. So I suffer from the optimism bias. And I've learned that about myself. I tend to be risk blind. I think, that the grass is green on the other side of the hill, that the glass is half empty. And I've learned that about myself, that I tend to underestimate risks and think too positive things about what will happen. If I make I'm coach, consultant, trainer, if I make a bid in a speech or a consulting bid, I am too likely to think that this bid will be accepted, that I will win, and so on. I make a lot of mistakes like this. So I've learned over time that this is the problem, and I've learned to correct for it by running my ideas by someone who is pessimistic to give me that sense of external feedback. So that's something about myself. Now, the way you would learn about yourself is to learn about cognitive biases. There's no other way but to learn about cognitive biases. So you can go to Wikipedia. There's a list of over 100 of them, and you could see which ones you tend to fall into. Now, a more effective way is to check out my book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters, because that has an assessment at the end. So it has an assessment in Chapter 7, which you can go to and see which of the 30 most dangerous cognitive biases for business professionals you tend to be most vulnerable to. I'll give you another example. The planning fallacy is a big one. Business leaders tend to make plans as though those plans will come true. This is, for many business leaders, it is the case. So they tend to make plans that are way too optimistic, way too positive because they're confident about themselves. They feel good about their plans, so they make plans as though it will come true. So a way to see if that happens, the way the assessment asks that is to see how many of your projects over the last year, projects in your team, yourself, your company, have run over budget and or over time. So what's the percentage of projects? You know, when I ask that in a training, I get all sorts of answers from 2% to 98%. I've literally had those 2% to 98%. The people who are 2%, they're not vulnerable to the planning fallacy. The people who are on the 98%, yeah, this is a huge problem for them.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. We're up against the close of the show. Can you tell us where we can find your book and how we can contact you if we wanted you to facilitate a training or something like that?
Sure. The book is available everywhere. It's published by a traditional publisher, Career Press. So again, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. Physical bookstores, online, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, get it there. You can contact me by going to disasteravoidanceexperts.com. Again, disasteravoidanceexperts.com. That's my website with blogs, articles, newsletters, videos, and so on. You can check all of that out there. You can email me if you have any questions about anything I said in the show at gleb@disasteravoidanceexperts.com. Again, gleb@disasteravoidanceexperts.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Gleb Tsipursky, so GLEB TSIPURSK, and follow me on Twitter, Gleb_Tsipursky.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being on the show today. That was really good information. I'm going to mull that over. I seriously have to. That's good stuff.
Helpful, Melanie. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. That was terrific. Please come back.
I will be glad to do so.
All right, great. You have a great weekend.
You too, Melanie.
That was Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. He was talking to us about his book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. Make sure you go and pick that book up. Some great information about our cognitive biases and how they affect our decision-making and how we should be aware of that so that we're not making bad gut decisions. We should base our decisions on some facts, maybe. Imagine that. So I hope you guys enjoyed our guests this afternoon, this evening. I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank everybody in the Facey chat. If you were listening to this via download, thank you so much for downloading Money Talk with Melanie. And I want you to remember that after all, this is important because it's your money. Have a great weekend.